Welcome to the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast for 𝗪cie. We're brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on Toyota. Let's go places. Charlie Roumeliotis. I am Pat Boyle. Charlie, how you doing today?
What's going on? We made it to another week, fun week of playoff hockey that we'll get into later in the show, but also some developments on the coaching front for the Blackhawks. So let's dive in.
Yeah, let's start there. Blackhawks head coaching search. We discussed on this podcast that their number one target on their list of candidates was David Carle, the longtime coach at Denver. Coached two U.S. teams in the World Juniors to gold medals. A word came from Elliotte Friedman on Saturday that Carle had withdrawn from consideration for the Hawks head coaching job. Apparently, word was spreading Friday night at the U18 event in U18 World Championships in Dallas that Carle had pulled his name out from consideration. And your initial reaction to that.
Yeah, so my first thought, well, let's kind of contextualize this first. I think all along it had been made public that it wasn't going to be a foregone conclusion that David Carle was going to make the jump to the NHL. It was always going to be, it had to be a perfect situation for himself, for his family. He wanted to be aligned with the organization philosophically. And so there wasn't a foregone conclusion that he was going to make the jump. And so it sounds like, Elliotte Friedman had reported on his latest 32 Thoughts that it sounds like he's leaning back toward returning to the University of Denver. And I think the disappointment is warranted if you're a Blackhawks fan, because it was kind of like he used their top choice. You figured that it would kind of align perfectly with Chicago's rebuild, where they want to take the next step. He has coached some of the young players on the Blackhawks roster, like Frank Nazar, Sam Rinzel, Oliver Moore at the World Juniors. And so I think it's okay to be a little bit bummed that he didn't make the jump over to Chicago. I think for me, it would sting less if he returned back to Denver. But if he ended up choosing a different NHL gig, I think that would be tough on the Blackhawks, because I'm not sure, because I feel like Chicago is kind of like a perfect situation for a guy like David Carle to kind of grow with the team. My one question mark would be for David Carle is because he's got 3 kids under the age of 5, right? So he's got a family. He's not going to move his family for like a crazy situation. Would he opt for a quieter type of market for his first gig? Like, is that kind of like maybe something that he would be weighing? Like, if Anaheim was interested in him, would he prefer to go better living situation, quieter market, kind of doesn't have to be so loud? Or is it all hockey where, because if it's all hockey, like Chicago is like, should be at the top of anyone's list as far as like a team to grow with?
Yeah. Let's start with your initial premise. It was going to take a perfect situation for David to leave Denver. He's very comfortable there. You mentioned the 3 kids that are young. They just had the 3rd in the last couple of weeks. So not, from a timing aspect, to make a career jump like this probably wasn't the best timing to be considering that. There was some word that Carle wasn't as convinced about the Blackhawks' future as the Blackhawks are. That would be a little bit of a red flag for me if there was thought by him and other candidates that, they didn't see philosophically how this team was being built. And I'm with you. This stings a lot less if he stays at Denver and continues on there and tries to win national championships there. If he ends up taking one of these openings, and whether it's a smaller market or what have you, I don't think the market, I think it's more where the team is at as far as their rebuild, how in line he is with the hockey ops of that team, and the patience that, he has stated on several podcasts. He doesn't like that. Right now, the average tenure for an NHL coach, do you know what it is?
I think I saw this the other day. It's like 2.3.
2.3 years.
I mean,
so, the wash, rinse, repeat, it's a very easy cycle. And we're going to get into Mike Sullivan parting ways with Pittsburgh. Even great coaches are, being moved out of positions. So, I think it was going to take the perfect fit for David. This obviously wasn't the right time for the Blackhawks and Carle to come together. And now it's plan B, because he was plan A. And I don't know if they had a solid grouping underneath him. So kind of let's get into how the coaching search goes from this point forward. I would cast a wide net here, and I would prefer coaches that have had coaching experience in the National Hockey League. I would wait until the playoffs are just about done, because I think there could be some surprises that join the market. Your reaction: Mike Sullivan won, of course, 2 Stanley Cups in Pittsburgh. He was there for 10 years. Sidney Crosby said he was his favorite coach of all time. And yesterday, he parts ways with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And to me, he's at the top of my list as far as candidates I would like to talk to if I'm the Chicago Blackhawks. My biggest concern is, does he have the appetite for this rebuild where he's at in his career?
Right. Like, Mike Sullivan is going to be the hottest name on the market, or at least he is right now, because of his winning pedigree, what he did with Pittsburgh, the way he commands a room. I mean, checks all of those boxes, right? But because he's going to be the hottest name in the market, he will be able to he can be as patient as he wants to choose his next destination, because it's my understanding that this wasn't a mutual parting of ways with him and the Penguins. Like, he's still getting paid by the Penguins. So they kind of phrased it like they just weren't seeing each other. But this wasn't, hey, this is Mike is like, hey, I'm gonna mutually do, like, he's still getting paid by Pittsburgh. So he doesn't necessarily have to jump right back into a situation if it doesn't fit his potential timeline. So it's easy for the both of us to say Mike Sullivan would be option 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the Blackhawks, right? But there are going to be a lot of other, I think there are 7 coaches openings right now in the NHL. There might be a team out there right now that is okay with their head coach, but because Mike Sullivan has become available, they might be reconsidering their position on their current head coach if they have the opportunity to go and get a Mike Sullivan. Similar to what we saw St. Louis last year, where they named their interim head coach after 𝗏𝗏 just on a 1 or 2 year deal. I can't remember what it was, because they were holding out hope that if Jim Montgomery becomes available, we'll kick the can on him and we'll bring Jim in here, because that's ideal. Their
and
ideal
look how
choice.
That worked out.
And it worked out beautifully.
Perfectly.
So that's going to be the challenge. Like, it's easy to say Mike Sullivan should be the Blackhawks' top target. I'm not sure if that's going to be reciprocated by Sullivan, who, by the way, was a development coach for the Blackhawks during their 2015 Stanley Cup run. So there is an organizational tie. So I think he would have overlapped with Kyle Davidson for a year, obviously, in that position. I'm not sure how much they really knew of each other, but there is that organizational familiarity. My question is, Pat, you mentioned I'm curious to see what happens after this first round, because hypothetically, if Tampa loses in the first round, is that going to be the end of Jon Cooper? Because there are some whispers that Cooper might be prepared to do like a Mike Sullivan, where he maybe feels like it's the end of his road there. And if Colorado loses in the first round, does Jared Bednar become available? And so if that's the case, like, Colorado and Tampa Bay might be looking at Mike Sullivan, and then Colorado might be looking at Mike Sullivan or Jon Cooper or whoever. And so it could lead to this chaotic, multi-layered situation where the Blackhawks have to kind of pivot and be like, okay, what's going to be available to us with all these other openings that have become available?
The angst on, and I preface this, it's X, so there's usually plenty of angst to go around, but for Bednar in Colorado and placing the blame from where they sit with Dallas in that series at his feet, like, wow. So I'm with you. I think you need to wait and see how everything shakes out. If anybody gets rid of Jon Cooper in Tampa, I would walk to Tampa, put him on my back, and carry him to Chicago. God willing, he would want to be here. So, I mean, those are two names that would absolutely change the landscape of the coaching search. But I would think Mike Sullivan right now, it's Rangers for him, or he might be a little pickier and sit back. He's got 2 years remaining on his deal. And, you listen to some of the comments that 𝗁𝗏𝗏 made out of Pittsburgh, and they're at that crossroads, right? They're at the rebuild, but we have Sidney Crosby and Malkin, and how do we go about doing this? And, Sid still has something left in the tank. It doesn't sound like he has an appetite to finish his career anywhere else. And it sounded like Dubas was getting the vibe that, while Sullivan would like to probably stay in Pittsburgh, I don't know how reassured he was that Sullivan was the right guy after 10 years to embark on what looks to be a multi-year retooling, rebuilding, however you want to phrase it.
Yeah, I listened to 𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏's press conference yesterday, and he made the point where he's like, I couldn't think of an example where there's a head coach in the NHL that brought a Stanley Cup to the organization. They went through a rebuild, and then that head coach won another Stanley Cup with the organization through it. And he just felt like Mike Sullivan's time with the Pittsburgh Penguins hit the end of the road where it's time for a new voice. I think Mike Sullivan wanted to win quicker, and Dubas is kind of looking at this more longer term, like, hey, we need to retool this, and it's going to take a few more years. And so that maybe philosophically, the way they want to play is probably the same, but I think how quickly they get there is a different timeline. And so no surprise that the Penguins went in a different direction. But
and probably why Sid is so in line with Sullivan, because obviously Crosby doesn't have many holes left on the back nine. He would like to see this rebuild be done more in the light of what Washington has done, and try to expedite it. And that's probably why the bond between Sullivan and Crosby was so strong to the very end.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know the Washington Capitals example is probably the example that Pittsburgh is trying to model, or the Pittsburgh players and maybe the coaching staff were trying to hope that the management would get to. But it's just a lot of things went right for the Capitals to get there. And so it just feels unrealistic. And so, as far as, okay, so David Carle removes himself from consideration. We think, Mike Sullivan, probably like Jon Cooper, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, if they become available, it's obviously going to be unlikely that they come to Chicago as well too, right? So I put together a list yesterday of 15 potential candidates at the Blackhawks to be the next permanent head coach. And I want to preface this by saying I put together a pretty lengthy list, not because I thought every single one of those candidates would actually be a candidate for the Blackhawks job, but I wanted to lay out exactly what is out there for the Blackhawks and what path they decide. Like, there are some options I included on that list that I wouldn't even be crazy about. Like, Claude Julien I had mentioned on there, like the assistant for the St. Louis Blues. I think he's more old school. Wouldn't be my cup of tea. I know I mentioned Dave Hakstol. I'm not crazy about that option. Like, I've heard conflicting things about him. He's just a mixed track record in the professional ranking. Jay Leach I put on there, but I think that might be too big of a risk for the Blackhawks to go down that path. Not crazy about 𝗵𝗏𝗏𝗏. Rick Tocchet, doesn't feel like he's going to be back in Vancouver, but I think it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to Philadelphia. Pascal Vincent, I'm not sure, skeptical. So there are these names out there that the Blackhawks can explore, but I'm not sure it would be the right fit. So two names have caught my eye, and I haven't really considered them deeper the first time we talked about this, but there are two names that I think potentially blend in the experience, but also the developmental side, where it wouldn't be a first-time head coach, or it wouldn't be a first-time new situation. Jeff Blashill, the assistant head coach for the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's been there for 3 years, learning under Jon Cooper, who we've just basically said if we were Chicago, we'd give him a minority stakeholder if Jon Cooper wanted to come to Chicago. But he is the NHL's best coach. But the thing that with Jeff Blashill, he's been a coach in the AHL. I think even prior to that level, won a Calder Cup. I think he won a Calder Cup. But his situation that he stepped in to Detroit, replacing a legend in Mike Babcock, right? So it was a tough situation where he's basically entering the situation similar to Jeremy Colleton here in Chicago, where he was replacing Joel Quenneville. And it's like, how do you do that? It's like the cards are already stacked against you. But that situation that he stepped in for Detroit was on the back nine of the Red Wings playoff run. Like, it had just come to an end. Henrik Zetterberg was 35 years old. Pavel Datsyuk was 37. Like, it was just, he was set up to not fail, but it was a tough uphill battle for him. He somehow lasted 7 years with Detroit. And so I think he was doing something right. And I think he also coached, it was Patrick Kane at Team USA for the Worlds in 2017. So he has NHL head coaching experience, international experience, a developmental background. And I think this would be a much better situation for Blashill, where he's stepping into a team that's on the ascension versus the Detroit situation where he was on a team on the decline. The other name that kind of stood out to me was David Quinn. Like, he's been an NHL head coach, college, AHL, USHL. I think he was the one that actually won the Calder Cup, I think. But also was an NHL head coach, San Jose, 2 different stops, right? New York Rangers, I think the other one was. And I think he's the kind of guy, spent the last year learning under Mike Sullivan. So you have Blashill learning under Cooper, David Quinn learning under Mike Sullivan. I think if you're the Blackhawks, those would be less risky of moves if you decided to hire someone that has no NHL coaching experience and they kind of graduated from an assistant to a coach for the first time. But with those 2 names, I feel like they check a lot of boxes. So those would be my 2 names that would be potential sleeper candidates for the Blackhawks in this coaching search.
Yeah, the thing about Blashill that I would actually, it also applies to David Quinn. Just because you're under a great coach in Cooper or Sullivan, doesn't mean that necessarily carries you into the next job and puts you ahead of the game. I mean, I look at Derek Malone.
I was just going to say that.
Nobody knew him better than Steve Yzerman, because Steve put together basically that Tampa team and then left right before they won the back-to-backs. And Derek Malone didn't work out in Detroit, and once he left, there was a bump, albeit somewhat inconsistent, when Todd McCullough took over. So I like Blashill at least having that head coaching experience in an Original Six market, in a hockey crazed town. So I don't think the waters would be too choppy for him to handle here in Chicago. And I like the David Quinn. I certainly would talk to them both. Rick Tocchet, I agree with you. I think he's done in Vancouver. A couple things I just would like to see with this next coach, and it is accountability and development. And I think Rick is one of the straight shooters in the National Hockey League. I think he went through, to say a drama-riddled season in Vancouver would be grossly underestimating what he went through and what that team went through. I mean, it was a soap opera every day, 10 times on Sundays. It does look like it's a natural fit in Philadelphia, but I'm also hearing that it almost might be too many ex-Flyers, like a good old boy alumni team. You've got Keith Jones, you've got Patrick Sharp, you've got all these former Danny Briere, all these former Flyers, and do they need to have another voice that maybe had a little different path than everybody else has in the building? So I think that's something to look at. I would heavily consider Rick Tocchet. I do feel like his shelf life is not as long as some coaches. And so I wonder timeline wise how that would work. But I don't want to punt on a year of development and accountability, waiting for the next round. Jay Woodcroft, what are your thoughts on Jay?
So with Jay Woodcroft, I like the idea of it, but he's still kind of largely unproven because he has a really strong record in the 113 games that he coached with the Oilers. But how much of that is just by default coaching Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl? So it's like, I don't know, like there's a risk in there too. To your Flyers point, I agree with you. That would be a lot of former Flyers that are, if Rick Tocchet goes there, which feels like he's going. But that's also the mold of Philadelphia. Like they hired Ron Hextall to be their GM. They had Craig Berube as their head coach. They like
Bob Clark was their head of hockey ops forever.
Yeah, they like when they can bring in people that know exactly what the culture is, the mold, the fan base. And so it's just going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I got two of the names mixed up. So Blashill did win a Calder Cup trophy. So he spent 3 years leading Detroit's AHL affiliate, and all 3 of those seasons, they won 40 plus games and 90 plus points. And he's the only coach in franchise history, Jeff Blashill is, in their Detroit's minor league system to have 3 consecutive 40-win seasons. Also, he won a Clark Cup in the USHL. So he's been a head coach, USHL, AHL, NHL, international. I like that, right?
I like that too.
With David Quinn, the experience, he's been a head coach, college, AHL, NHL. And then the one thing I forgot to mention was he was also the Olympic head coach when the NHL players couldn't go there. I think that was the year that 𝗵𝗀 was on the team, if I'm not mistaken. So he has that experience too. I would lean more towards that category versus going off the board and I know the 𝗵𝗀 𝗂𝗏𝗏s, and they're going to get a lot of attention. Like who could be the next 𝗵𝗀 𝗂𝗏𝗏 or whatever, but I would like some sort of NHL coaching experience where you're not stepping into a role. Like, for example, like I know, so Luke Richardson, and like Luke Richardson was stepping in. He had never been a head coach in the NHL, but he was in the AHL. So he had that head coaching experience. So I didn't mind that gamble. But it's like if you're bringing in a guy that has zero NHL coaching or zero head coaching experience at any level, that would be more of a risk. And so I think the Hawks would like to check a box of someone that has at least would know the role of a head coach and has performed at that level in some sort of capacity.
Yeah, it's funny. I had in my notes 𝗵𝗀 𝗂𝗏𝗏 2.0, trying to find that next coach in the AHL who's ready to make the jump. But Blashill checks a lot of those boxes: success at the AHL level, and then head coaching experience in the NHL. That may not be certainly a candidate that they should talk to, I would think.
Yeah.
And the other thing that came to mind, and this might be a meatball thing, but I would leave no stone unturned. I would talk to people even just to get their idea of candidates that they like, assistant coaches that they have seen, because not only is it important who they pick to be this next head coach, but also the assistants around that coach. Whatever maybe the deficiency of the head coach is, it'd be nice to find an assistant who excels maybe in that area. I would like to see, the totality of the coaching staff be looked at as they put this together. And a person I would talk to, I just, every time I watch him, I feel like I learn more. Rick Bowness. I see why he had such a vast track record in the National Hockey League. The way he dissects a team, the way he has won at every stop, maybe has not taken teams to the finish line, but and I know at his age, he's not a candidate that you would say that you would tab, at this stage of a rebuild. But he would be certainly somebody on my list that I'd like to sit down and pick their brain, even if it meant you come on as a consultant or you are part of the head coaching search. I would love to hear from him some of the names that he thinks have some of the pedigree that he has.
Yeah, that's exactly where I thought you were going. Not really a candidate for the job, but more of like, let's consult him because he has such a large Rolodex of hockey connections and he knows the coaching community, and he's probably been to a lot of those conventions where the coaches are at every year in the summer at the NHL draft a couple days beforehand. And so he can kind of understand, if you choose this route, here are the assistants that could come with it. And the assistants are a crucial part of the coaching staff too. I want to validate what you're saying there, because I know some people might be a little bit surprised by this, but the assistants are actually the ones that are working more one-on-one with the players than the head coach, because the head coach is so occupied with the day-to-day. What are we going to be running at practice tomorrow? What we're preparing for the next opponent. The assistants are the ones that are kind of the vessel between the head coach and the player and can actually sit down and do some video sessions with, right? There are certainly cases like if you're Connor Bedard, you want that one-on-one time with your head coach, but more likely it's going to be spent with the assistant coach. And so you want to make sure that there's a trust factor built in between the assistant coach and the player that would be working closely with. And so I agree it's a massive part of whichever direction the Blackhawks going with the head coach, who his assistants are going to be is going to be a key part of that equation as well.
And on that topic, I think Kevin Dean did a really, really nice job with the Blackhawks back end. You look at changes in coaches, changes in systems, bringing players up from the AHL with no NHL experience. It never seemed like the Blue Liners were drowning out there. And I think a lot of that credit and even the emergence of 𝗦𝗏cic the last couple of years may have something to do with Kevin Dean. And another guy that we haven't talked about, I think that David Carle backing out, certainly it improves Anders Sorensen's odds of getting better consideration or more consideration, or helps his stock, so to speak, if they decide that they liked what they saw from the development plan that he had. And again, I don't want them to thrust coaches on the next head coach, whoever that may be. They should be able to have final say on their coaching staff. But if for some reason you feel Anders is a right fit in the development of your forwards, maybe it's not a jump to Rockford and be the Ice Hogs head coach once again. Maybe it would be a position with the Blackhawks. Again, as you think of the totality of the coaching staff, not just the head coach.
Yeah, and I think too, it's important to note, and I know I don't want this to come across in a negative way, but I don't think when you're making this head coaching decision for the Blackhawks, I don't necessarily you have to think 4 years out from when they're Stanley Cup contenders. Like, I think you just need to find a coach that will help you get through the next step. I'm not saying this next coach is going to have a short shelf life and then you wait till the Blackhawks are playoff contenders in 3 years to actually get the guy to put them over the edge. But you need the priority of this next head coach is the next 2 years. Like, you have to get this head coaching hire right for a coach to lead them through the next 2 years of a rebuild, to get them to the next step and not have it be a year of regression where it's like, okay, hired a head coach, things aren't going well after 2 years. Like, you can always revisit on a year-to-year basis. Again, similar to the example that we brought up with St. Louis, we saw with the Cubs with Joe Madden. They were like, well, Joe Madden became available and we wouldn't have made a coaching or a managerial change if he didn't become available. So like you can always revisit down the road when the Hawks are hitting the next checkpoints in their rebuild. Again, you don't want to go into this thinking, okay, just find a coach for 2 years, then you'll hire another one in year 3, because then that would be the third coaching hire for Kyle Davidson. But you have to take it on a year-to-year basis, and just this next coach is crucial to get them through the next phase of the rebuild.
All right, next big date on Blackhawks fans' calendar is Monday, May 5th. The NHL Draft Lottery will take place. We know the Hawks have the second best odds to land the number 1 overall pick at 13.5. The Sharks have the best odds at 25.5.
How are we feeling? We feeling lucky, or are we feeling?
Well, 2 years ago, we jumped up. Last year was the chalk year, right? Pretty much everybody stayed in the position that they finished the season in points wise. So I think we'll either stay put, or let's get frisky and jump up again, and that'll probably be the last time, right? If we did jump up to 1, then we couldn't move up the next how many years?
Yeah, I think you can only jump up 2 and 5 years. But I think technically, because did the Blackhawks finish dead last in the Connor Bedard year, or did they jump up?
No, we had the second best odds.
Yeah, you're right. They jumped up. Okay. So yeah, you're right. If they jump up this year, that would be the final time the Blackhawks can do so in 5 years. But I think Chicago's not expecting to be in that position moving forward.
Well,
so you would think.
You would think. Let's quickly take a tour of the playoff situation. Dallas took a 3-2 series lead last night, beating the Avs 6-2. The Stars are doing this without 𝗬𝗏𝗏 and without Jason Robertson. They were 1 for 4 on the man advantage. You talked about Bednar being, the whispers about him. This series, do you think we can see the Avs even things up and force a Game 7?
So, really quick, I don't know if you noticed this, but it was after the Florida-Tampa game went final yesterday. Every single series in the Eastern Conference was 3-1, and every single season in the West, or every single series in the West was 2-2. So it's like it's funny how both conferences, it's like one conference is a dogfight, the other one's kind of everyone's coasting. I'm a little surprised that Colorado isn't taking care of business against Dallas, because Dallas was legitimately one of the worst teams in the entire NHL analytically, looking at their 5-on-5 numbers in the final 2 months of the season. But to me, it's been, I don't know if it's like Dallas has been flipping a switch. It just feels like Dallas is getting great goaltending by Jake Oettinger. I mean, Mackenzie Blackwood has been awesome too. But
the first goal he let in last night, seconds into the game, was a little soft.
Yeah, it was. But I would expect Colorado to force a Game 7. Like, I would be shocked if this ended on their home ice. And I think if Colorado wins Game 6 at home, they go to Dallas. I think Colorado is going to win Game 7. I just think they're the better hockey team. But for Dallas to be doing this without Miro 𝗬𝗏𝗏 and Jason Robertson, given how they finished the season, I'm stunned at that development.
I am too. How about the Panthers? They took a 3-1 series lead over Tampa last night. An exciting game, back and forth. It looked like the Lightning were going to pull things out on the road and even up this best-of-7 series. And the Cats strike for 2 quick goals. Ekblad and Seth Jones, your game winner, on what I thought is a puck to Vasilevsky. He needs to stop.
What is going on with Andrei Vasilevsky? That's 3 straight postseasons now that his numbers have really dipped. And
we haven't talked about Connor Hellebuyck yet.
Yeah, touche. We'll get there. But with Vasilevsky, that was he was literally on Connor Hellebuyck's level in the regular season as far as impact. Like, he was right there as far as save percentage, in the shutouts department, goals against average, like goals saved above expected. Vasilevsky was having a terrific bounce back season. I'm really disappointed that he hasn't been the rock that Tampa Bay has needed in this series, because Florida's getting the goaltending. Tampa Bay is not. Do you think 𝗏𝗏𝗏 gets a suspension for that, for Brandon Hagel? I think he's going to get a game.
Yeah, I think he is. It's a phone hearing, so it's not a for sure. Yeah, I think he's looking at a game.
The fact that I don't know,
and the fact that Hagel left the game and didn't come back.
Yeah, like if it was a forearm to the high chest area and Hagel's head snapped back,
got a little more shoulder. He got no shoulder. It seemed like it was
right. But if it was like he got really high and Hagel's head snapped back, like that's still a legal play. But for him to just kind of right in the neck / chin area, yeah, I think he's going to get suspended.
How about the former Blackhawks? It seems like every night coming through with big goals or big assists. So you had Seth Jones last night. We've seen Dylan Strome. We've seen Domi. We've seen Phil Deneau. We've seen Colin Blackwell.
Anthony Beauvillier.
How about that story? Yeah, like maybe next year we have to do like a former Blackhawks draft, and we each pick some players, and we see who garners the most points throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs. Because that list is getting bigger seemingly by the year. There's been a lot of turnover.
It is. Philip Deneau has been unbelievable too for the LA Kings, which, by the way, what is going on in that series? Because we were texting the other day. Feels like anytime I lose faith in Edmonton, they reel me back in. Like LA should be up in this series 3-1 handily, but they're not.
Oilers were down 2 in the third period. Nobody to that point in the Stanley Cup playoffs had come back from a 2-goal deficit and won the game. They get the equalizer with like 29 seconds to go, and then they win it in overtime. I'm with you. LA should be up in this series, and I don't think that those comebacks are sustainable from the Oilers' perspective.
Yeah, and I will say this too. The LA Kings are getting a lot of heat for sitting on their leads. Yeah. But if you've watched them all season long, that is how they play. They score 2 or 3 goals a game, or like 2 to 3 goals per game, and they check and protect the neutral zone better than any team in the entire NHL. The problem is you can't get away with that against McDavid and 𝗏𝗏𝗏. Right, you can get away with that with maybe 30 other NHL teams. You can't get away with it with those two. And so it's not like the Kings are playing a different style. That's literally how they play. Even against Chicago, like it was so hard for the Blackhawks after the LA Kings scored 2 goals. Like the Kings just sit on their lead and they do it better than anyone. It's just Edmonton is the very, very rare exception where you have to keep your foot on the gas pedal.
So the Leafs can finish off the Senators tonight. They lead that series 3-1. Carolina can do the same to the Devils. Both those games are home in Carolina, home in Toronto. And then the Wild VGK series tied it to 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗀 is an absolute stud. What he and Boldy are able to create together. Vegas has no answer for that line, Charlie.
They don't. And it's been a joy to watch 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and Boldy. And I think it was at the playoff, was it last year, the year prior, where Wild general manager Bill Guerin actually called out Matthew Boldy and said he has to play better. He has to change his game in the play, or however he phrased it. He called out Matt Boldy. Message received and answered. Like, this guy is emerging as a borderline star. I don't know if I'd go superstar, but like he is legitimately playing his way onto Team USA's radar for a lot of these international tournaments because he has been exactly what Bill Guerin has wanted Boldy to be in the playoffs. The one thing I'll say about Vegas, which I didn't see, like it's a 2-2 series, but it kind of felt like it got real dicey going into Minnesota, and Vegas is down 2-1. Jack Eichel, 1 point in the series, -7 rating. So at some point, it feels like he's going to take over a game or two and get hot. And I think for Vegas' sake, maybe you're a little relieved that they find themselves in a 2-2 situation with Jack Eichel not playing his best yet. And so I think Vegas is going to get this over the line, but this has been a little hairier than I thought it would be for the Golden Knights.
And for some reason, the Jets and the Blues have 2 games off seemingly between every game in this series. What is going on with Connor Hellebuyck? For him to be considered not only the Vezina Trophy winner, but many think he has a good shot at winning the Hart Trophy as the MVP of the league, to then go to the postseason and have the worst save percentage of any starting netminder. I mean, Charlie, what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it feels like he's probably battling a lot of intrusive thoughts and some demons going into the playoffs, because it's not just, oh, he's been a good regular season goalie. Like, he's been an all-time great regular season goalie in NHL history. And for him to just not even be just average in the playoffs, like, it just totally reverts. I will say there were a lot of goals in that last game that I'm not sure you could really blame him, but that Robert Thomas goal to make it, I think it was the 5th goal. I mean, he just looked totally, it was 100% psychological. Like, he just kind of brain cramped and, just went down way early, just like kind of a half-hearted effort. It just, I don't know exactly what's going on there. I know last playoffs, last year, he like got a little was it like he like got a little combative with the media, didn't want to talk about it, or I think he like maybe just refused to come out. So like there's definitely some sort of like mental hurdle that he also needs to get over. But boy, I if you're the Winnipeg Jets, like the players in front of him, they basically built their entire team all season long where we can make mistakes because we got that guy in the back end. And now you're almost like, it's quite the opposite, where you're like, we have to lift up our goalie that we had all season long. Like, they're playing a different style, like mentally, because they're like, we're not sure our guy has it in the playoffs yet. So it's got to be a weird
Do they survive?
feeling.
Do you think the Blues pull off the upset, or do you like the Jets?
I still like Winnipeg, because I was looking at some of the numbers, like Jordan Binnington. It feels like Jordan Binnington has been one of the best goalies in the playoffs, but he actually has his goals saved above expected is -0.2. So he's just been average. Okay. It maybe feels like it though, because Hellebuyck is not making the saves that he is expected to make, and Binnington is, and so maybe it's just some of the higher quality chances get magnified with Binnington, but I don't know. Like, it's just, at this point, you're just hoping, if you're Winnipeg, you're just hoping Hellebuyck just stops the shots that he needs to stop, and Winnipeg will take care of the rest.
All right. Last week I had jury duty, and there's a tie-in to this podcast. So I was summoned to the Northern District of Illinois, U.S. District Court, for jury duty. First off, kudos to the Northern District of Illinois. They run a tight ship. The next time you go, Charlie, to the post office or the DMV to get your license, picture that group of people that are in the lines. Those are your peers. And they have to wrangle 150 of those people in a downtown Chicago courthouse at 8:30 in the morning on a given Monday. It was run very efficiently. I was impressed. So roughly 45 people get called and given questionnaires, and then you head to your floor to start the jury selection process in the courtroom. 14 people go into the jury box in groups of 14. So, and we had Judge Alonzo was our judge, and he asked the same 33 questions that are on your questionnaire are asked to every single potential juror. It's a really long day, especially when you've heard the same question literally 50 times. So I was in the last group, and it's after 5 o'clock, and I'm in the jury box, and you see the lawyers for the plaintiffs and the defendant, and you're in a courtroom, district court, Chicago. I mean, it looks this is a serious matter, and it's my turn to be interviewed. They pass me the mic, and the judge says, like, I recognize you. And, which you're not expecting to hear, from the judge, and points out, sports broadcast or whatever, blah, 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 Blackhawks. And the judge, and clearly the attorneys, they have profiles on all of us. Like, they know the basic logistics of where we live, what we do, who we're married to, what that person does, blah, blah, blah. So they're looking for consistencies or inconsistencies in the story as they cross-examine. So it's time for cross-examination. And the defendant's attorney, like, he had a sense of humor, and he's kind of like, and it's now like 5:20 and it's been a long day. And so they passed the mic to me, and I'm not expected to get a question asked to me. And he's like, all right, I got to ask you, everybody in this courtroom wants to know, will the Blackhawks win the Stanley Cup in the next 5 years? And he goes, let me remind you, you're under oath and you're being recorded on this. And so the courtroom laughs, and there was a little bit of levity into a long day. And, we were shortly adjourned or while they decided on the final jury for this particular trial. So we go out in the hallway, and now, people are like kind of coming up and saying stuff, and Blackhawks and a fist bump and blah, blah, blah. And then this one guy comes up and he's like, I got the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast in my queue. And I was like, oh, hey, how you doing? And so we start talking about the Hawks. Big fan of yours, Charlie. He's excited that you moved on to radio this year. But I will say that a pro tip, if you ever get called to jury duty, bring that phone, bring some earbuds, and bring some podcasts, because during the adjournments, and even maybe when you're sitting through jury selection, instead of hearing the same question 500 million times, you could put on the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast like a couple jury members did last week when I ran into them. Anyways, all in all, do your civic duty. If you are called, it's a pretty well-oiled machine, and you might meet some Blackhawks fans along the way.
I love that. The fact that he had our podcast queued up was an incredible part of the story. It always throws me off sometimes when Hawks fans come up to me and talk about the Blackhawks in a setting that I'm least expecting it. Like when we're at Fifth Third, we expect fans to come up, say hi or whatever. But like if I'm at the grocery store or whatever and somebody comes up to me, I'm so thrown off that I'm like, oh my God, like, because my brain is just totally not even like in work mode. It's just kind of there to get my stuff, whatever. And so that's the way I was in that courtroom. Like, I was going to say, I can't even imagine what you were thinking. Like that's the last thing you thought that was probably going to get brought up.
So I've been broadcasting in Chicago for 21 years. So, I mean, even if you're not a sports fan, you've probably stumbled upon a Blackhawks playoff game in the past, or NBC5 or something. And you're like, did I go to high school with him? He got my, whatever it is. And so you get that, fairly regularly, but like you said, setting is everything. You're not expecting it, in a courtroom in the U.S. District Court. But again, it did bring a moment of levity to kind of a really long day. But it was uncomfortable for me to be like, don't we need to get back to what we're doing here so we can all get on with our day? Anyways, I wasn't picked for the jury, so no harm, no foul.
On behalf of the American people, we thank you for your service, Pat.
You are quite welcome. All right, I think that's it. I think we've done enough damage. So we've got the draft lottery on Monday. We will have a podcast following that, let you know exactly where the Blackhawks will pick. We'll begin to formulate some of the prospects that Kyle Davidson and the Blackhawks may select with that pick. And we transition into NHL draft. That is June 27, 28, 29?
Yeah, the first year where it's not centralized. So I'm still curious. It sounds like
it's the last year too.
You think so?
Yeah.
All right. I want to go back to Vegas at the Sphere.
Batman doesn't like it decentralized, and all the schmoozers like Elliot Friedman and Frank Saravalli and all the insiders, when they like to press the flesh a little bit. This is how they, all those long hours of texting all these general managers and coaches and players, they're able to pay it off a little bit and see these people in person. So, I think this, I don't agree with it. I think if you really want to do the best job on draft day, I think to have your war room set up at your team's headquarters and not be on the floor of an arena and be next to teams that you're trying to ultimately pass in the standings. I don't think that's good for business. I'm a fan of following what the NFL does. The NFL has gone decentralized for years and years and years and years, and they seem to be doing things all right.
The Blackhawks in 2022 literally lined up the 𝗦𝗪ce 𝗏𝗏𝗀 and 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗏 trades ahead of the draft, but it didn't get announced until later on in the day because they were like, we literally didn't want to go to the draft table and tip our hand on what we were working on. So it's like it literally impacted the Hawks on
it impedes with what you're trying to do. So
right.
Is the social aspect that you're taking away from this, is it really is it that a detriment, or is it trying to pull off trades and move up and down in draft rounds? Is that more important? Of course, that's more important.
Right. I mean, it's impacting the trajectory of a franchise. Like when you, I mean, it's,
and we wonder, and don't you wonder why when this wasn't a good example, this past NFL draft, but there hasn't been a ton of movement in previous years in the first round. And I think a lot of that is because it's not easy to conduct business on the floor of the arena when everybody's on top of one another.
Yeah, even if you're just trying to get a lay of the land on what guys are thinking, you see a general manager get up and walk or pick up the phone and you're like, what's he up to? So there could be more, it could be easier conversations or more conversations behind closed doors. The question now for the media member is there value going to the draft to speak with the newly drafted players or to stay back in Chicago? That is a dilemma we find ourselves in.
Sounds like a budgetary issue that I think every manager will address. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast presented by Toyota. For Charlie Roumeliotis, I'm Pat Boyle. Thank you for watching and listening, even if you're in a courtroom. We will catch you next time.